Hey guys, today I'll show you a psychological horror TV series named Karamora Season 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama begins with Kara, an anarchist and leader of a group of revolutionaries opposed to the Tsar. Just a day ago, he and his comrades stormed the city's post office. After firing a shot, they forced the beautiful telegraph operator to send a message across the empire, demanding the release of all imprisoned freedom fighters, the abolition of conscription, and the dissolution of the Third Bureau, allowing people to determine their own fate. However, one comrade made inappropriate advances towards the telegraph operator. The colleague, Alina, stepped forward, baring her unbrushed teeth and biting the man's arm, then grabbed a handgun to fight back. Unexpectedly, the safety was on, rendering the gun useless. Just as Alina was about to meet her fate, Kara intervened, pushing the comrade's gun away and saving her sexy life. Moved by Alina's bravery, Kara was fascinated by her, and they indeed needed someone with a sense of justice like her in their group. Bewildered at first, Alina quickly became Kara's lover and comrade. While at a bar, they encountered a cynical, bald-headed poet whose fiery rhetoric convinced Kara to recruit him. Unfortunately, their first attempt to rob from the rich to help the poor went awry. The bald businessman, Mr. Baldy, they targeted this time, was hugging a maid and laughing his beard off when bullets struck the table in front of him. Kara and his masked group surrounded them, and the maid was revealed to be Alina in disguise. They quickly controlled Mr. Baldy and his rich group. It turned out that recently, a fire at Mr. Baldy's refinery had killed 28 workers. His lawyer claimed that these workers had voluntarily entered the fire to attempt to extinguish it. Thus, the poor workers received no insurance compensation. That's why Kara and his group came to seek justice for the workers. Desperate to save his bald life, Mr. Baldy quickly disclosed the location and combination of his safe. Just as Kara was opening the safe, the newly recruited poet comrade mentioned that a friend of his was injured in the fire, needed an amputation, and unable to afford the expensive medical fees, had hanged himself. Losing his hands, the friend had to ask his 5-year-old daughter to tie the noose for him. Following this, the poet comrade approached Mr. Baldy from behind with a rope, dragging him aside like walking a dog. He threw the rope to his accomplices upstairs, who hoisted Mr. Baldy into the air using a pulley on the stair railing. As he gasped for air, Kara finally cut the rope with a dagger and threw a bundle of cash from the safe, instructing Mr. Baldy to deliver it to the families of the victims, warning him they would return if he failed. Mr. Baldy thought he had narrowly escaped with his bald life until the poet comrade, removing his hood and claiming superiority due to his brighter bald head, shot him on the spot. This completely disrupted Kara's plan, but there was no time to argue as they needed to leave before the Third Bureau arrived. It was only after they had driven a few blocks away that Kara sternly reprimanded the poet comrade. Mr. Baldy's death meant the victims' families lost all hope of compensation, yet the poet comrade just smiled at Kara with a look of hatred in his eyes. When they returned to their headquarters, one of the recruits kept watch outside while the rest prepared to divide the stolen money. Suddenly, the poet comrade turned traitor, pointing a gun at Kara and accusing him of colluding with officials, branding Kara a traitor planted within the organization. However, as he was sowing discord, a mysterious figure was slowly approaching the headquarters. The lookout immediately drew his weapon and aimed it at the figure's head, asking if he had lost his way. The man replied that he seemed to have come to the right place. At this point, inside the headquarters, only Alina remained supportive of Kara. The other underlings had been bought off by the poet comrade. Kara yelled at Alina to drop her gun and leave quickly, not wanting her to be dragged into danger. However, the poet comrade was not willing to let her go, offering Alina two choices, either to join him and live a life of luxury, or stay with Kara and die alongside him. As he counted down, Kara quietly pulled a dagger from his boot. Just then, the sound of a door opening interrupted them, and a figure staggered down the dark corridor. It was the lookout man. As everyone looked on in confusion, his body suddenly burst with blood, and he collapsed to the ground. The sudden turn of events left everyone frozen in place, sending shivers down their spine to their butt. Seizing the opportunity, Kara stabbed the treacherous poet comrade in the chest, grabbed Alina, and rushed into a nearby storeroom. With the wooden door blocking their view, they could only blindly shoot at each other. However, after a few screams, an eerie silence fell outside. Kara, noticing Alina hadn't said a word, stood up only to discover she had been shot in the abdomen, bleeding profusely. Knowing she needed immediate medical attention to survive, Kara peered through the bullet holes in the door. The scene outside was unclear, but near the door lay a handgun. Kara performed an aerial flip to grab the gun, but the gruesome scene before him was shockingly horrific. All the men lay in pools of blood. One even had his head embedded in the wall. Suddenly, a headless corpse fell behind Kara. The dagger stuck in the chest indicated it was the poet comrade. From above, sounds of a monster swallowing echoed. Kara strained to look up and saw a horrifying sight, a figure hanging upside down from the ceiling, ferociously devouring the bald head. Before Kara could react, several cold shots struck the hanging monster, bringing it down. The shooter was none other than Alina, rallying her strength for one last act. However, just as the monster seemed dead, it came back to life. Hearing movement, Kara rushed forward and fired several rounds into the creature's head, turning half of it into a sieve. As he turned toward Alina, she lay motionless on the ground. Before tears of grief could fall, the half-faced monster staggered to its feet again. Kara instinctively turned back, only to be startled as the creature stuffed its decayed flesh into the facial cavity, taunting that his shots really hurt and Kara should accept his judgment now. In panic, Kara started to flee for his shitty life, but he couldn't escape the monster's pursuit. He ran onto a beam, underestimating his own weight, and fell heavily. Fortunately, another beam below saved his life. As the monster traced his scent like a GPS gadget in the darkness, Kara desperately ran into a dead end and realized he was trapped. With the monster closing in, Kara frantically kicked at the wooden floor beneath him, hoping his shoe heels were sturdy enough. In a critical moment, the floorboard broke and he forcefully stomped through, falling into the sewer below and drifting away with the current. Unknown to Kara, the monster was part of the mysterious Third Bureau under the Tsar's rule, a group that only the true vampire bloodline could join. Count Yuri was one of its members. Unlike typical creatures of their kind, these vampires seemed unafraid of sunlight. As dawn broke, another Third Bureau member, Gula, arrived to find one body missing. He questioned Yuri, who was drinking blood to heal his injuries. After satiating his thirst, Yuri quickly recovered. Just as Gula prepared to destroy the evidence with a bomb, Yuri took an interest in the recently deceased Alina, captivated by her beauty. On the other side, Kara woke up on the beach by the harbor, injured and struggling to reach his sister's house for help. She immediately brought out alcohol and gauze to clean and stitch up his wounds. Without any anesthesia, Kara could no longer withstand the pain and eventually passed out. When he woke up again, his girlfriend Alina was right beside him. Everything that had transpired seemed like a nightmare. He held on to Alina, who he thought was dead, not wanting to let go. But in the next moment, the room plunged into darkness. Kara got out of bed and walked towards the bathroom, only to find Alina apparently feeding on something. But when she turned around, Kara was horrified to see that Alina's victim was himself. It was all just a dream within a dream. Afterward, Kara first went to a church to ask the priest if demons really existed in reality, but the priest's response was vague. He then went to the police chief to inquire who the Third Bureau had sent to eliminate his team. It turned out Kara was indeed an undercover agent, but when he mentioned demons, the chief's face changed. He spoke of a squad in the Third Bureau called the Pale Knights, who would place their captives on a conical fire barrel and sit them there for 3 days, reveling in the excruciating taste. The chief said he had already canceled Kara's undercover status and advised him to flee as far as possible. However, Kara went alone to the Senate, laid out his experiences in front of the executives, only to be met with cruel laughter from those around. Everyone thought he had gone mad. Kara fired several shots at a statue to silence the crowd, shouting that demons really existed among them, but he was dragged out by security, treated like a madman. When Kara returned home, a squad showed up. 2 muscular men restrained Kara, and the leader pulled a hot iron bucket from the stove, coated it with a layer of wax oil, and kicked it under Kara. Facing the cruel tortures, Kara's fighting spirit erupted. He broke free from the 2 men and fought against 3 in the room. He hit one in the groin with his belt, then turned around to knock down another, but the leader straddled him, grinding down on him. Kara grabbed the man's arm, kicked him against the wall, and blocked a knife attack with a chair. The leader tried to shoot, but his aim was poor. Kara tackled him, knocking the gun under the bed. As another strong man went to pick up the gun, Kara quickly pounced on him to stop him, but the leader piled on top of him, punching him in the waist. After kicking the leader away again, Kara broke a bed leg, then leaped onto the bed, sending the unlucky one under the bed to his doom. The other strong man was thrown into the fireplace for a facial roast. The leader, grabbing a vase to attack Kara from behind, was met with the sharp point of the fire bucket, receiving a harsh lesson. Kara barely had time to catch his breath when he saw the man roasted in the fireplace stand up again. Exhausted, he could only retreat repeatedly, but the man's face was completely blackened, too weakened to continue fighting, and he stumbled towards the door. However, as soon as he opened the door, an old man knocked him down with 2 strikes. Kara thought his time had come, but the old man closed the door and wiped the blood from his knife, reminding Kara that he shouldn't leave any survivors. The old man's appearance was timely, prompted by Kara's previous speech in the Senate. From the old man, Kara learned the true face of the former ruler Tsar and about a world with silver-fearing vampiric creatures, which no one had believed for 30 years, thinking the old man was insane. But after private investigations, the old man had found some clues in the Kalba Mountains. He offered Kara a choice, either to hide and live quietly or join him in uncovering the truth. Spitting out a mouthful of blood-stained saliva, Kara decided to join the old man in uncovering the truth and avenging Alina. The scene shifts to Alina, who miraculously survived. After she came to her senses, she found herself lying on a smelly king-sized bed, while vampire Yuri, attracted by her beauty, sat in a little chair beside her, urging her not to panic. He explained that she and her comrades had been shot in the abdomen during a firefight. Believing she was close to death, he had turned her into a vampire. Alina laughed upon hearing this, asking if he was joking with a child. But as she laughed, she realized something was off. Yuri had 4 sharp fangs in his mouth, which shocked her into a chicken scream. Yuri calmly asked why she was screaming, pointing out that she had fangs too. Touching her teeth, Alina was stunned to find her own had turned into sharp fangs as well. Yuri explained that it was the only way to save her from her death. Still, Alina couldn't accept becoming a monster and broke down in tears like a giant baby. To test Yuri's claim, she slashed her arm with a dinner knife. The wound healed within seconds, leaving her stunned. Skeptical, she cut herself twice more with the same result. Alina then tried to hang herself with the rope, but instead, her body simply swung like a pendant, unharmed. That night, she jumped from the 5th-floor window of the castle, and again, she was perfectly fine. Yuri finally advised her to stop trying to kill herself, explaining that vampires could only be destroyed by silver or fire. He also urged her to drink some blood provided by the butler, as her body wouldn't last long without it. However, Alina was still not ready to give up. One day, Count Gula came to inquire about Alina. When he learned that Yuri had turned his enemy into a vampire, he gave him a choice: beheading with a silver axe or burning to ashes. Yuri, with a hint of humor, noted that beheading was less painful while burning was more spectacular, which silenced Gula. He then reminded Yuri that harboring an enemy was a serious crime and noted that Alina clearly did not want to surrender. She might be beautiful, but her mind seemed off. Others might rejoice at being resurrected from death, but Alina was obsessed with ending her life, suggesting she should have died initially. Yuri, having spent a few days with Alina, didn't believe she was a deranged terrorist. He thought she had been misled into joining the revolutionists. Gula stood up, dismissing Yuri's thoughts and stating that once brainwashed by terrorists, one could never return to a normal life. Knowing Yuri would struggle to do it himself, Gula decided to help eliminate this threat. Just as he was loading a silver bullet to put Alina down, he found her engulfed in flames, attempting self-immolation. Gula managed to extinguish the fire with a blanket, but Alina's once beautiful face was gone. Shocked by her determination to die, Gula grabbed a cup of blood from the table and forced it down her chicken throat despite her resistance. As she swallowed, her body transformed instantly. The pain subsided quickly, and even her burns healed completely. At that moment, Gula lost any desire to kill her and instead began to speak of the meaning of the existence of vampires. Years ago, he found Yuri, barely alive at 13, amidst the corpses on a battlefield. Impressed by his fierce will to survive, he turned him into a vampire. Alina, however, sought death, which puzzled him. Alina said she didn't want to become a monster. Gula explained that Yuri turned Alina into a vampire out of pity and that vampires weren't villains. They too were fighting against evil. It turned out that they had long ago made a pact with the Tsar. Humans would provide fresh blood, and vampires would help humans by punishing the wicked. Although the church portrayed them as malevolent outsiders, they were actually guardians of peace. Gula then handed Alina a weapon, telling her there was no need for the painful self-immolation. A single silver bullet could end her life. He left the choice to her, either to end her life or become a guardian of humanity. Meanwhile, Yuri in the living room worried about Alina's situation, but was astonished to hear that Gula had spared her. Gula explained that faced with such a virtuous woman, he couldn't bring himself to harm her, especially her sexy body. He admitted that Alina had a bit of Joan of Arc in her, lacking the courage to self-immolate like her. Though he left a gun for Alina, his centuries of experience told him that her curiosity might change her mind. While they discussed this, Alina hummed a tune and appeared, asking about a wanted poster on the table. Gula explained they were after a psycho killer targeting young women. Alina expressed eagerness to deal with the psycho killer, stunning Yuri with her rapid identity shift. She said since she had this new identity, she might as well use it for good deeds. And so, Alina became a champion of justice. On the other side, the old man and Kara prepared to reveal the existence of demons to the public through the media. They encountered an American journalist on their way to the Karba Mountains who scoffed at their story. With no other option, they forcefully took him along. However, their Ferrari carriage was ambushed in a forest. The coachman was killed by a sniper, and their Ferrari carriage became a stationary target. Kara doused the roof with the old man's liquor and set it alight, scaring the horses and allowing them to escape. When Kara reached a small hut, he found the sniper already dead, leaving behind a child whom Kara ultimately spared. After a long journey, they reached the Karba Mountains' desolate swamps, where an ancient vampire supposedly lived in a decrepit cabin. Inside, they found it long abandoned, with rats and insects crawling on a dusty, foul-smelling dinner table. At the back, the old man found his goal, a desiccated vampire woman. The photographer mocked their fruitless journey, but the old man cut his palm and fed her his diabetic blood, reviving her slightly. Under the camera's lens, she revealed the secrets of vampire life, lamenting that immortality felt more like a curse as she watched her loved ones die one after another, including her daughter who chose death over becoming a monster like her mother. The old man then revealed another mummified young woman beside her, startling the photographer. The vampire woman explained that her daughter had left her a century ago and she lacked the means to end her own life. As a reward for answering their questions, she asked for a swift end. The old man promptly drove a mithril dagger into her heart, fulfilling her last wish. Upon leaving, he set the villa ablaze, granting them eternal release. Having obtained the footage of the vampires, the group returned to Moscow. What follows will depend on the strength of media coverage. Kara believes that even if only a small percentage of people believe, it's a significant victory. Soon, people will begin asking questions, demanding an investigation into the presence of vampires within the Empire's various departments. Kara inquires from the old man how ancient people determined who was a vampire. The old man reveals that the emperor of the time did not bother to identify them, but instead executed 100,000 people, roughly 1/5 of the country's population at the time. However, a major upheaval that very night disrupted the group's plans. The head of the recently departed photographer was fished out of a river, and the other hundreds of employees at the newspaper office were not spared either. By then, the old man was terrified by their tactics. The day before the news release, an entire branch of a major newspaper was annihilated. Clearly, the vampires had prior information. Now, the photographer's films must have fallen into their hands. They had no money and no weapons. How could they continue to fight against the Third Bureau and the vampires? But at this point, Kara was blinded by a seed of hatred, believing that creating a high-radius fragmentation bomb could defeat all the discovered vampires. But where would they find a chemist to make such a bomb? Hearing Kara declare he would research bomb-making himself, the old man decisively chose to leave him. Kara didn't give up, but went back to fiercely study the basics of chemistry, preparing to create a bomb himself. He nearly blew himself up in the process. With each experimental failure, Kara grew increasingly disheartened. However, just as he was about to give up, a short-haired woman approached him, stating that making explosives required a professional chemist. She then unveiled a suitcase full of cash to invest in Kara's anti-Tsar efforts. She mentioned knowing a young, wealthy man named Mark, who had the technical know-how to make bombs. The two stealthily attacked the target's caravan at night, leading to a fierce battle and eventually defeating the 20 bodyguards Mark's uncle had sent, successfully kidnapping him. Unexpectedly, Mark, though seemingly frail, proved resilient and resisted all attempts to coerce him into making bombs, even against the woman's seductive efforts. When Mark confessed that although he was a chemistry fanatic, he was unwilling to kill. Kara then revealed everything to him. Their targets were not humans, but vampires hidden among them. Enlightened by this, Mark's eyes sparkled, and he immediately agreed to join Kara's team. Suffering from a terminal illness with only a year left to live, Mark found it fitting to dedicate his remaining days to serving humanity. Later at night, after Kara had fallen into a gentle slumber, their base was suddenly surrounded. Fortunately, Mark used his homemade chemical weapons to fight through and rescue Kara, who had been tied up in bed. As they prepared to flee to the train station, the sponsor woman appeared and shot Mark. It was then revealed that after Mark's disappearance, his wealthy uncle had put out a 10 million bounty on him. The woman's organization, led by her own brother, aimed to claim this ransom, and she could not defy his orders. She hoped Kara would stay and hand over Mark. However, blinded by hatred from Alina's death, Kara stubbornly decided to leave with Mark. The woman, aiming her gun to stop him, was shot by Kara in a retaliatory fire, dying with tears in her eyes. The two then managed to escape, climbing aboard a passing train as their pursuers closed in. The scene shifts to Yuri and Alina, who had received a challenging task. Their target this time was a psycho killer who was terrorizing the city, victimizing many young women who had lost their hope of earning enough money to return to their villages and marry a decent man. Taking the task, Alina transformed into a justice-seeking vampire girl and arrived at the crime scene to find one of the victims was her former colleague from the post office. It was because of this act of bravery that she met Kara in the past. According to Yuri, Kara had drowned in a sewer. Channeling her grief into strength and seeking revenge for her colleague, Alina still found no clues after several days. Since the victims were all 20-year-old women with black hair and baby faces, Alina decided to disguise herself as one to lure the perpetrator, while Yuri stayed nearby in a cafe to provide support. Before the operation, Alina and Yuri had a conversation. She still believed Yuri had no right to make her a vampire, and she would never forgive him because it meant she could never see her love, Kara, again. Yuri explained that he had had no choice at the time as they were enemies, and he had to act decisively. However, while Alina was luring the perpetrator, Yuri's superior arrived, claiming there was an issue with Yuri's previous mission report. The mission was to eliminate 6 people, but only 4 bodies were found. Yuri dismissed it as a trivial issue, saying the 2 had fallen into a sewer and drowned. But the situation was not that simple. An inspector from the bureau appeared, intending to thoroughly investigate the matter, and threatening to send Yuri to the guillotine if given the chance. It seemed that even among the vampires, there were various factions. Meanwhile, the psycho killer in a sports car finally showed up and picked up Alina on the roadside, who was pretending to be a gold digger and waiting for the big fish to take the bait. Unexpectedly, the killer knocked her out and dragged her heavy body into his car to speed away. After the superior left, Yuri realized Alina was no longer in sight and sensed trouble. Fortunately, Alina hadn't been captured for long, and thanks to the vampire's keen sense of smell, Yuri was able to locate her quickly like a GPS gadget. When Alina awoke, she found herself paralyzed, tied to an iron bed, while the psycho killer kindly helped her trim her clothes. Initially, she wanted to curse him, but under the influence of drugs, she couldn't utter a single sound. The psycho killer didn't show any brutal intentions, but instead stood up, selected a scalpel from his toolbox, and returned to her. By then, Alina was terrified, but her helpless struggles only made the psycho killer smile more, claiming he was there to redeem her, a girl lost in darkness. As the blade cut through her skin, she screamed like a pig being slaughtered, but this didn't affect him. Only when blood began flowing like water and then miraculously flowed back and healed the wound did the psycho killer become completely dumbfounded. At that moment, Alina's eyes turned fierce and she lunged at him, fangs bared. In a critical moment, Yuri broke down the door, arriving to stop her. Alina regained her composure and tearfully explained that she didn't want to become a monster that fed on human blood. However, such a psycho criminal who harmed young girls, who should have been sentenced to death after being caught, was not only spared any punishment, but was also acquitted on the grounds of insufficient evidence due to heavy bribery. Upon hearing the news, Alina was immediately outraged. Yuri advised her not to act rashly, as her identity as a vampire would be revealed, putting both of them at risk of the guillotine. But Alina couldn't care less and felt compelled to seek justice for those lost lives. Thus, that very night, Alina personally sought out the psycho killer, who was so frightened by her appearance that he wet himself. But just then, the door was suddenly pushed open. It was the man's mother, who, seeing her son nervous, thought she had interrupted them at a bad time. The mother invited Alina to join them for dinner downstairs. Alina couldn't reveal her identity, and the psycho killer didn't mention that Alina was there to kill him. At that moment, Yuri, claiming to be Alina's father, suddenly visited, leading to a bizarre scene resembling a parents' meeting during a matchmaking session. Yuri tried to convince Alina that the twisted nature of this world couldn't be changed by one person alone. But Alina didn't care. Yuri, with no other choice, placed a gun on the dining table, startling the parents. The mother quickly advised that young people should be free to date without resorting to knives and guns. The psycho killer was terrified and got up to flee from the troubled spot, but Alina instantly moved in front of him, blocking his path. It was only then that the parents realized the terrifying entity their son had involved them with. But the father remained composed and asked what exactly was going on. Alina laid out their son's crimes, but the rich father simply asked her to name a price, believing that there's nothing money can't solve as many do. The mother also remarked that those were just dirty girls, and her well-behaved son wouldn't harm good people. He had a passion for medicine, starting with animals and then moving on to servants. Thus, the wealthy father suggested she target those wayward girls to clean up the world. Alina then shared her own tragic childhood experiences, her parents being persecuted due to the power of the wealthy. After hearing Alina's sorrowful story, Yuri was also moved. The Third Bureau always claimed to maintain national peace, yet murderers escaped punishment. So he picked up the gun from the table and silently walked away. The wealthy couple thought they had averted danger, not realizing that the real threat to their lives was the seemingly frail girl in front of them. Screams echoed through the mansion as Alina, recovering from her rage, found herself surrounded by the severed limbs of the psycho boy's family, having become a cruel and terrifying killer. Now, all Alina wanted was self-destruction. She pulled out a gun loaded with silver bullets, ready to end her life when Yuri entered and stopped her, saying he knew a way to turn her back into a human. The scene shifts to a bearded man who thrust his arm rather than his beard into a sealed cage, and soon after, voracious devouring noises could be heard. His pained expression scared those around him. 10 seconds later, he withdrew his arm, devoid of any intact skin or flesh. As time passed, his wound visibly healed. The man was not only a vampire, but also the leader of this generation of vampires. The cage contained a creature that fed on vampires, tragically bred from their own kind. Vampires had always considered themselves the pinnacle of life, but with technological advancements, they were increasingly exposed to the public eye. Recently, to prevent a publishing house from exposing vampires, they destroyed it completely and silenced all witnesses. As the vampire population grew uncontrollably, the leader decided they should no longer be vampires. This made all the clans laugh, thinking he was joking. Some even argued that without the military deterrence of vampires, other European vampires would threaten the empire's rule. But the leader felt that feudal autocracy was a thing of the past and that rulers like them would eventually be replaced. However, he couldn't ask the many vampires to willingly give up their eternal life. Thus, he took a few people to the palace's underground prison to demonstrate the creature's power, where many of their kind were also imprisoned. If they didn't find a way to turn back into humans, their own children would consume them one day. Tasked with a mission, Yuri convinced Alina to become human again. He also ensured that he wouldn't be executed for secretly turning an enemy into a vampire. The two drove to a farm where it was said an elder knew how to turn vampires back into humans. The man was a living legend, well known throughout the country, with many followers, and he had founded an anti-violence vampire society. He lived a secluded life on the farm. However, while Alina was using the restroom, the elder quietly pleaded with her to take him away. Although his books advocated for prohibition and vegetarianism, he had nearly gone mad over the years. His zealous followers followed him everywhere. He promised to reveal how to turn vampires into humans if Alina took him away. With that, Alina and the elder quickly fled the farm. But once the man was well fed and rested, he revealed that the method was already written in his book. In order to resist the thirst for blood and divert one's attention through physical labor, she should manage to exhaust herself during the day so that she has no energy to drink blood at night. Curious, Yuri asked how long this treatment would take. The elder said it had taken him about 30 years, a trivial period for vampires who live much longer. Unable to wait that long, Alina asked if there was a faster way. The elder's words plunged her into despair. Only through a long period of pain and despair could one change. Alina thought the elder was a fraud and decided to take him back to the farm, intending to deprive him of his freedom once again. He then mentioned a rumor he had heard during his quest to become human. In a village in Tobolsk province, a saint supposedly had this ability. Following the lead, Alina and Yuri traveled to the remote mountain village in search of the legendary saint. They intended to gather information at a local inn, but inadvertently revealed their vampire identities when the heavy scent of freshly slaughtered pig blood made Alina dizzy. The innkeeper, sensing something off, served them drinks in silver goblets to confirm his suspicions. The instant Alina touched the goblet, a severe burning sensation confirmed their vampire nature. Hidden demon hunters in the inn took notice, viewing them as walking treasures. A confrontation was inevitable. After a narrow escape into the woods where they shook off the demon hunters, a burly man targeted them. Forced into a desperate situation, Alina jumped off a stone bridge, followed closely by the man. Yuri arrived and shot at the man, but the bullets had no effect. It turned out the burly man was one of those mutant vampire descendants previously contained by the royal palace and encountered by Yuri's team, which had lost several vampires in subduing it. Seeing that bullets were ineffective, Yuri leaped down, drew his sword, and engaged the monster in a fierce fight, ultimately severing the creature's arms in TikTok style. As he prepared to deliver the final blow, the creature suddenly went berserk and overpowered Yuri, choking him to near death. At the critical moment, Alina pulled out a gun loaded with silver bullets and shot the monster down. As Yuri stood up and saw that the monster was still struggling, he picked up his sword to finish it off. Just then, a man appeared, shouting for mercy. The previously agitated monster became unusually docile in his presence. Actually, the man was the saint they were seeking. He gently placed his hand on Yuri's shoulder, saying everything would be all right, and Yuri's wound healed rapidly. The saint then approached Alina, touched her shoulder, and suggested they return to the capital. Alina involuntarily agreed. The scene shifts to Kara and Mark returning to Moscow on a freight train. They immediately sought out black market dealers to buy materials for making explosives. They unexpectedly encountered Mr. Baldy, the wealthy businessman who was supposed to have been killed previously. Since Kara was wearing a mask, Mr. Baldy didn't recognize him. Kara concluded that Mr. Baldy must also be a vampire now. Their primary task now was to rally more people, as they couldn't handle it alone. Kara then contacted his former boss, who frequented a bathhouse every Friday to choose a masseuse for relaxation. While his boss was enjoying the service, Kara approached him to discuss a deal. With guidance from the police chief, Kara indeed found several fearless tough guys to form an elite demon hunting squad. With that goal in mind and risking his life, Kara went to a public execution to rescue a brother and sister who were death row inmates. The brother, a sharpshooter officer, had killed his superior who had assaulted his sister. Another death row inmate also wanted to be rescued and recruited, but Kara promptly sent him to meet Satan. After that, they continued their recruitment mission. The blood-covered man in the bathtub was Dmitri, who had agreed to meet Kara, but decided life was meaningless while preparing for a bath, thinking it better to die. Kara admired such a fearless man. The last recruit was a cynical man Kara had met at his sister's party. Recently, the cynical man had become cynical about the world and even shaved his head. Once the Demon Hunter squad was assembled, their first mission to hunt vampires began. Their target was Mr. Baldy, who frequented the bathhouse every Wednesday. However, just as they had knocked everyone out and were struggling to carry the unconscious man, an unexpected event occurred. One of their lookouts encountered a young lady pleading for help, desperately seeking her husband inside the bathhouse. Her pitiful appearance made the lookout lower his guard, and he agreed to deliver a message to her husband. Unbeknownst to him, it was all an act set up by the lady. Suddenly, several burly men rushed in, and the lady pulled a hairpin from her head and used it as a needle to knock him out with acupuncture. Their exit was blocked, and Kara and his team were thrown into disarray. The hypnotic gas could only maintain its effect for a few minutes. As the lady's prolonged attack was unsuccessful, she resorted to a divide-and-conquer strategy, claiming that Kara was a police undercover agent responsible for the deaths of 5 team members. She promised the others their freedom if they surrendered. Dmitri quickly threw down his weapon and disclosed Kara's hiding spot. The attackers kept their promise and let him go, then stormed into the bathhouse. During the chaos, a stray bullet hit Mr. Baldy on the floor, who immediately started biting the person next to him. The attackers were thrown into disarray when Mr. Baldy, now stimulated by blood, regained consciousness. Instead of continuing the attack, he moved to a steam pipe, broke it with his hands, and released a large amount of steam, obscuring everyone's vision within a half-meter radius. It was now hunting time for Mr. Baldy, who appeared and disappeared ghost-like in the mist. After the chaotic gunfire and screams died down, the bathhouse fell silent again. Meanwhile, Dmitri had only pretended to surrender and had actually run back to bring reinforcements. Mark arrived at the bathhouse with newly developed heavy weaponry, but the slaughter continued. One by one, the lady's men were dragged into the mist and silenced. The terrified lady accidentally ran into Kara in a corner. Before she could ask any questions, she was also dragged into the mist. Kara decided to lure Mr. Baldy out by biting into his own palm, letting the scent of his blood drift. Mr. Baldy, enjoying the taste of the lady's blood, instantly recognized the familiar scent and identified Kara as the masked robber who robbed him years ago. When asked why he had the power to kill them all, but chose to feign weakness and be killed by his men, Mr. Baldy, hidden in the mist, began to recount his plan, revealing that he had bribed Kara's man before their operation to stage his own death, allowing him to avoid paying his workers and sell the refinery for a huge insurance payout. After the revelation, Kara spotted a figure in the mist and fired several shots. He realized it was just a human shield held up by Mr. Baldy. Just as Kara was about to be doomed, Mark's voice, followed by a sliding metal bedpan, gave Kara the scare of his life, making him jump into the bathing pool. The unsuspecting Mr. Baldy was blown to bits on the spot. Although the Demon Hunter Squad's first mission was fraught with difficulties, they ultimately succeeded in eliminating their first target. However, after Kara's past identity was exposed, the cynical man, realizing the terrifying nature of the vampires, chose to leave. The remaining squad members were either fearless lunatics or had only a year to live due to tuberculosis, including the siblings rescued from the execution ground. Convinced that many vampires were at the top of society, Mark suggested using a powder made from silver fluoride, typically used for water disinfection due to its high solubility. When added to drinks, it would cause a burning sensation in vampires but leave humans unaffected. Kara approached his noble sister to host a grand ball, inviting the elite so they could identify the vampires among them. Before the plan could begin, the entire team needed to learn court servant etiquette. On the day of the party, they would pose as attendants, adding soluble silver fluoride to the drinks. The member playing the piano would keep a close watch and record the names of those who showed signs of burning after drinking, thus identifying the hidden vampires. Kara was also supposed to participate, but just before departure, he received an iron box containing a severed hand with a familiar pendant belonging to the old man who had once saved him. Obviously, this is a death threat. Unbeknownst to Kara, his presumed dead girlfriend Alina had also arrived at the scene of the ball. Their tragic missed connection directly led to a sorrowful end for the star-crossed lovers. At the ball, as a beautiful woman was proposed, a man clad in a red robe appeared. He delivered a deadly greeting to everyone present. A massive fireball exploded among the crowd, and when the smoke cleared, the scene was horrific. Kara's sister, standing too close, was blown to pieces on the spot. However, this is an explosion even unexpected by Kara and his group. Most of those who survived were the tenacious vampires. Alina's companion was fortunate to survive, but tragically lost her legs. Due to shielding the vampire leader during the explosion, Dmitri was appreciated by the vampires and ironically became the leader's personal guard. Alina, having witnessed the ruthless side of the revolutionists, which contradicted everything Kara had described, found shelter with the vampire leader. The entire family treated her with great care, and she became best friends with the leader's daughter, who lost her legs due to the explosion. Realizing that humans were the real monsters, Alina volunteered to formally join the vampire clan to fight against the sinister revolutionists. Meanwhile, after rescuing the old man, the gang boss, Carl, valued Kara's bravery and gave him 3 days to consider joining their organization. On the way back, one of Carl's men boasted about their attack on the vampire officials at the ball, estimating heavy casualties. Enraged by the news, Kara slammed his head into the steering wheel and left the car to kill the other accompanying members. His meticulously laid plans had been disrupted and ended disastrously, also resulting in his sister's death. At the vampire gathering, Alina pledged her life to fight evil, undeterred by any cost, and underwent a blood baptism by shedding her clothes. Simultaneously, Dmitri seized an opportunity to shoot the vampire leader with a silver bullet, unaware that he was a pacifist among vampires who wished to become human again. Dmitri faced execution, but before it could be carried out, Yuri ordered the guards away and bit a large chunk of flesh from Dmitri's arm, demanding to know his leader. Knowing he would die, Dmitri shouted Kara's name and kicked the gallows lever, ending his life. Yuri, shocked to hear Kara's name, realized he was the man his beloved Alina had been longing for. He thought Kara had died in a sewer accident. Meanwhile, Kara, unaware that he was now exposed to the vampires, was surrounded by Carl's gangsters after attending his sister's funeral. His men were killed by Kara in a fit of rage, but Carl offered him a deal, either to work for him or watch his remaining men die. Kara was forced to submit. Soon after, an opportunity to strike against the vampires arose. Learning that Kara was alive, Yuri found his old boss, who refused to betray Kara. Yuri decided to tail him, but the police chief informed Kara before leaving the station. Kara and his men, armed with silver-embedded clubs, ambushed Yuri, underestimating his strength. Most were incapacitated quickly, but Kara arrived in time to strike a critical blow. The injured Yuri fled, with Kara and his men in hot pursuit, even using blue fire and a Gatling gun in a metallic frenzy. However, they only found 2 dead men in the elevator and discovered a large hole torn in the roof, with Yuri climbing upwards. As Kara prepared to fire the Gatling gun, Yuri cut the elevator cable, sending it crashing down. When Kara emerged from the dust, Yuri had already escaped. Back at the base, Kara was consumed with frustration. In the enclosed space, an excellent opportunity had slipped through his fingers. The bloodsucker responsible for his girlfriend's death had escaped. However, the old man believed that in his quest for revenge, Kara had lost his sanity. Inside the building where the major battle with the vampires took place today, many residents were injured. Kara expressed his helplessness, caught between the vampires and a ruthless gang boss, with no real choice left. The old man pulled out a potion that could simulate death and tried to persuade Kara not to continue working for Carl, saying that in his fight against the evil vampires, Kara had now become a slave to another kind of evil. Kara accepted the potion and then met Carl at the church that night. Carl's aim was to overthrow the vampire rule and become the nation's leader. In his eyes, both humans and vampires were beasts, devoid of good or bad, driven only by the basic instinct of survival of the fittest. Realizing Carl's true nature, Kara made up his mind. He wrapped a wire around his hand, stepped forward, and strangled Carl. Quickly, the gang boss stopped breathing. However, just as Kara was about to leave, Carl suddenly sat up and began to clap. It turned out that the gang boss plotting to overthrow the vampire rule was a vampire himself. Carl teleported in front of Kara and knocked him to the ground. His dominance over Moscow's underworld was maintained through the vampire's immortal nature. He proposed turning Kara into a vampire so they could together drive those into hell. As Kara wrestled with this difficult choice, a flash of blue light erupted, and Carl was hurled away. It turned out to be Kara's men arriving just in time, using a newly developed high-tech cannon to eliminate Carl. When the police chief arrived at the scene, Kara personally cut his palm and fed his blood to revive Carl, allowing the police to witness the existence of vampires and join their ranks. The secrets Carl revealed while begging for mercy shocked everyone. He had been captured early on by the vampire army commander, who needed a violent and evil enemy as an opponent. Thus, Carl became a pawn in the vampires' intra-species conflict, including several assassination attempts on their leader, which were all orchestrated by the commander, because their vampire leader stubbornly wanted to turn vampires back into humans, while the commander didn't want to lose eternal life. However, a new power had emerged in this complex game, and Carl had recently defected to the other side. Kara and his group followed him to a secluded manor, where they met the saint who could control minds with his hands, and who also wished to rule after overthrowing the vampire regime. He informed Kara that he possessed the ability to control the vampire's natural enemies. As Kara and his group discussed how to overthrow the vampires, he was unaware that his girlfriend Alina had also become a vampire and had developed feelings for Yuri, whom Kara had injured. Yuri tracked down Kara, but when he arrived, the men sent by the commander had already captured him. That night, Yuri came to the prison to confront Kara about whose actions truly benefited the people. As they argued, a mess server pulled a bomb from the food bucket and detonated it, blasting Yuri away. Kara chose not to kill Yuri for revenge, but instead advanced deeper into the dungeon. The arriving guards stood no chance and were quickly eliminated. It turned out that Kara's capture was all part of a calculated plan with Carl to eliminate all vampires by releasing a blood demon imprisoned in the basement to distract the vampire army. Meanwhile, the siblings, one leading a team to kill the commander, who was about to be crowned the new vampire leader, and the other notifying other revolutionists to start an uprising. The team stormed the palace. Using the high-tech electro-light cannon, they eliminated the vampire minions, but the commander, who had escaped to the bedroom, pulled out a Gatling gun and killed all his attackers. Just as he triumphantly picked up the electro-light cannon, Carl appeared and pointed a gun at his head. Suddenly, a cabinet flew across the room, knocking Carl over. It was Alina who had come to save the commander, allowing him to turn the tables and kill Carl. Meanwhile, in the prison, the blood demon had already broken through the iron bars and was fighting alongside the vampires. Although Yuri and Gula were powerful, they were outnumbered, and the vampire forces were being defeated. Just when it seemed they would be completely overwhelmed, the saint appeared, and with a wave of his hand, he commanded the blood demons to turn and face Kara. Realizing he had outlived his usefulness, Kara ran deeper into the dungeon and, with no other choice, hid in a cell. But to his dismay, a blood demon was already lying in wait. Faced with becoming a horrid monster, Kara ultimately chose to end his own life. In the end, the saint emerged as the ultimate victor, seizing military power from the commander and ascending as the new czar. What no one knew, however, was that Kara had taken a death-simulating potion given to him by the old man before his supposed suicide. His body was brought back from the graveyard by the old man. Unfortunately, their fate was twisted as they once again encountered the revolutionists who had previously kidnapped Mark for ransom. The two were captured by them and endured severe torture. Unable to withstand the torment, the old man passed away. Kara seized the opportunity to kill the guard and escape. After returning to Moscow, he used a mask to cover his injured jaw and face. At the club, he used the potion to capture Gula and bring him before the revolutionists. Without hesitation, he fired 4 shots into his chest. As everyone looked on in confusion, Kara raised his hand to show them all carefully, pulled out a dagger and forcefully slashed his palm. Then he placed his bleeding hand into Gula's mouth. At that moment, a bizarre change occurred. The bullets inside Gula were pushed out by his bulletproof muscles, and his wounds healed visibly fast. Kara planned to use this method to reveal the existence of the Blood Clan to everyone and gain the support of the revolutionists to complete his revenge. On the other side, the Saint, now the new vampire leader, entered the room where the commander was held and demanded his loyalty. It turned out that the Saint was the first Tsar of Russia whose child had been a blood demon. After conducting research, the Saint discovered that the blood demon was a natural mutation of the vampire species. He became obsessed with solving this issue, which caused the nation to fall under the control of the vampires. Fortunately, during his research, he accidentally discovered a potion that could induce a death-like state in the vampires. After faking his death, he continued his research on the blood demon for nearly a century until he learned how to control it. He didn't immediately return to seize power, but patiently waited. He knew that one day the appearance of the blood demon would force the vampires to seek his help, and then he could reclaim his position as Tsar. However, just as he finished outlining his centuries-long plan, the Saint suddenly clutched his throat and collapsed. The wine he had drunk was laced with a poison developed specifically against the vampires by the commander. Just as he called his men to handle the body, the Saint, in a death-like state, suddenly erupted, attempting to suck blood to recover from his injuries. As he struggled to escape, the commander pulled out the high-tech cannon he had seized and shot him down. He then drove a silver dagger into the heart of the Saint. After gaining the support of the revolutionists, Kara began planning to eliminate the vampires. Intelligence revealed that Yuri was hosting a grand wedding, inviting all vampire clans. This presented a perfect opportunity to strike. The team was equipped with the latest firearms, all with silver bullets, and another major weapon was the flamethrower, specifically targeting the vampire's fear of fire. However, before departing, Kara asked the ailing Mark to stay behind, fearing that the revolutionists would use him and then discard him. On the day of the wedding, as everyone eagerly awaited the arrival of the bridal car, disaster struck. It wasn't the bride in the carriage, but a fully armed Kara. Flames burst forth towards the crowd, turning the entire estate into a battleground. The vampires who couldn't escape in time were instantly incinerated, while those who ran were mercilessly mowed down by machine gun fire. Under the assault of these specific weapons, the once powerful vampire clan became utterly vulnerable, like lambs to the slaughter, with no ability to fight back. Seeing Yuri flee into the villa, Kara pursued him inside. Any vampire he encountered was burned to ashes. Soon he found Yuri on the second floor, trying to heal his wounds by feeding. Yuri turned to run, but was met with a blast from the flamethrower. Now Kara wasn't in a rush to exact revenge. Instead, he watched his enemy roll on the ground in agony. It took Yuri a while to extinguish the flames, but Kara then pinned him down by stepping on his head. Removing his mask, Kara revealed a face disfigured with a bullet wound that had torn through half of his face. It's a gift from Yuri. Just as Kara was about to finish off Yuri, he heard a familiar voice. It's Alina, dressed in a bridal gown, appearing before him. Seeing his beloved alive, Kara excitedly lowered his gun and embraced the equally shocked Alina. Noticing her wearing a wedding ring, Kara immediately removed it and replaced it with the ring he had intended to propose to Alina with. However, as he slipped it on, Alina's finger mysteriously began to smoke. It was then Kara realized that his once beloved had also become a vampire. Alina claimed that Yuri hadn't harmed her sexy body but saved her, and that it was Kara who had ruined their wedding. Kara explained that his revenge against the vampires was all for Alina, but she had already fallen for someone else and pushed Kara away, telling him to leave. She then ran to the fallen Yuri and cut her palm to heal his wounds. Betrayed and driven mad by hatred, Kara recounted the sacrifices he'd made and the blood he'd shed, only to find his beloved siding with his enemy. Still refusing to believe Alina was under Yuri's control, he hesitated no longer and opened fire at Yuri on the ground, but Alina shielded him with her body. Memories of their time together flashed before Kara as he held Alina and wept bitterly in the fire. When he awoke, he found he hadn't died, but had been rescued, and was hailed as a hero by the revolutionists for defeating the vampire clan. Ironically, the nobles who took power after the overthrow chose to become vampires themselves, claiming it was to counterattack in the impending World War. Kara's deceased comrades appeared before him, mocking his efforts that had only created a new wave of vampires. It was then Kara understood the old man's words, whoever told him that there was no difference between humans and the vampire clan. Those who sought to disrupt peace under the guise of overthrowing tyranny were no less bloodstained than the rulers before them. Kara told the new leader and everyone else that evil was like a virus. By killing those infected, one could become infected themselves. He then opened the case he carried, revealing a powerful liquid bomb, and chose to end his life alongside the vampires. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.